Today I'm out here near Union, Washington, taking a look at the Toyota RAV4, which is all new for this model year, and then of course the recently refreshed Mazda CX-5 over here to my left. The CX-5 is quite simply the prettiest entry in this segment, and now for this model year, we have a turbocharged engine under the hood that makes this one of the most powerful compact crossovers you can get. Over here on this side, Toyota has decided to go in a different direction with this generation of the RAV4, making this one of the most off-road capable compact crossovers in America, other than something like a Jeep Cherokee. You won't find a 2-speed transfer case under here like we find in the Jeep, but we do have a torque vectoring rear axle that's designed for off-road duty and one of the highest ground clearances available. It may seem odd to be comparing the CX-5 to the RAV4 in these particular forms, but I actually think it makes a lot of sense because for about the same price, between $37,000 and $38,000, you could have the choice of either one of these two vehicles, depending on exactly what's appealing to you at the moment. So let's discuss the pros and cons of each vehicle, how they compare, which one you might want to get for what reason. When Toyota redesigned the RAV4, they decided to make this look a little bit more like their truck line, and I think that's definitely a good look overall for the RAV4 because the previous generation was sort of an orphan when it came to overall styling. Now this model is the Adventure trim, which has the most truck-like grille up front, and at this point I should say that we did actually order a Toyota RAV4 hybrid for a long-term review here on Alex and Autos, so that is coming up soon, but this is not that model. This is actually the more off-road capable Adventure trim. We have full LED headlamps up front, fog lamps below, and then some go-anywhere cladding at the bottom of the bumper, but overall this is not quite as rugged as some of the other alternatives out there because this is just a plastic bottom to the bumper, not a metal scuff plate like we see in some of the competitors. Although the CX-5 is not as fresh as the RAV4, I think that the overall styling is definitely still the most attractive in the mainstream segment, and more attractive than many luxury compact crossovers out there as well. We have the strong chrome bar running right across the front, large Mazda logo that hides a radar adaptive cruise control sensor, LED headlamps that are sort of Angry Birds themed right there, and then some very small fog lamps down there at the bottom of the bumper. The CX-5 is not pretending to be the most off-road capable entry in this segment. Instead, this is definitely going after style and on-road driving ability. When it comes to overall length, the two vehicles are not really that far off one another. This is just over 179 inches long, whereas the RAV4 is a little bit over 181. But the overall styling is definitely different. The CX-5 has definitely gone for a more flowing, more sexy look back here. We have this rounded tail back there that we also see, for instance, in the new Mazda 3 hatchback. And then we have this long hood proportion up front, which is definitely very distinctive and very different than what we see over here in the RAV4. The RAV4, you can see, you can much more easily grab that top end of the hood, whereas over here in the CX-5, it is definitely a further reach away. Now, on the downside, this does leave us with less practical interior space versus the RAV4, but that's part of the reason that the CX-5 looks so good, especially from the front three-quarter profile. It's that long hood proportion that we also see in luxury rear-wheel drive vehicles. Over here in the RAV4, Toyota has definitely gone for a squarer and more angular theme. The Adventure model gives us the option of this two-tone paint job where the roof is this white color and then the bottom part of the body is this very electric blue. One of the other big differences you'll notice immediately is the overall ground clearance. You can see just by looking at it that the RAV4 is higher off the ground. This has 8.6 inches of overall clearance, putting this in direct competition with the Jeeps and the Subarus in this segment, where the CX-5 has about an inch less overall. The RAV4 also has a little bit of a rake back here in the rear end, but still overall things are a little bit squarer, and that definitely leads to greater cargo practicality in the Toyota versus the CX-5. But I think that the side profile in the CX-5 is just a little bit more attractive. Out back, both models have dual exhaust, but the similarities really end there. Over here on the CX-5, we definitely have a more curvaceous overall design. The rear end actually bulges out a little bit from tail lamp to tail lamp right over there, whereas we have a much flatter theme overall in the Toyota. We also have a more raked rear window overall, which leads to a slightly lower overall cargo practicality in this. And the step-in height for cargo is just a little bit higher than what we see over here in the RAV4 Adventure. But I have to say that the overall styling of the RAV4 Adventure isn't as much my cup of tea as the CX-5 back there. I think I would give up some of the cargo practicality for the prettier model. Let me know what you think about the overall styling of both of these vehicles down there in the comment section below. I think that it really was the right direction to make the RAV4 a little bit more aggressive, a little bit butcher for lack of a better word in this generation, but I have to say that if my money were on the line, I think the CX-5 is a little bit prettier. Both vehicles use a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine, but aside from that, they couldn't be more different under the hood. The RAV4 over here uses a naturally aspirated four-cylinder engine. It produces 203 horsepower, and it's mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission, one of the newest transmissions in the Aisin lineup, basically the same unit that we see under the hood of certain Lexus products. Even when equipped with the torque vectoring all-wheel drive system that this model is equipped with, this gets 28 miles per gallon combined, which is very, very good for this particular segment, but it's not as powerful as some of the other alternatives. Then under the hood of the Mazda over here, we have a 2.5-liter turbocharged engine that's been borrowed out of the larger CX-9. This gives us 24 miles per gallon combined, which is lower than the RAV4 because we produce more power. 227 horsepower with regular unleaded, 250 horsepower with premium. Mazda tells us that this will operate safely and effectively on regular unleaded, so you don't have to worry about that, but if you want that extra level of performance, then again, you will have to feed it premium. This is mated to an older 6-speed automatic transmission design. Mazda has been very dedicated to that transmission, but it does result in overall lower fuel economy. This comes in at 24 miles per gallon combined, as equipped right here with all-wheel drive. When it comes to overall front seat comfort, I think the CX-5 beats the RAV4 by a hair over here on the driver's seat. Both vehicles offer a multi-way adjustable power driver's seat. Both vehicles offer a tilt telescopic steering column with about the same range of overall motion. One thing that I really like in the CX-5 that we don't find in this RAV4 is a power passenger seat. And as a result of the power passenger seat, it is a little bit more comfortable because it can move in some slightly different directions than what we find over here in this model. Hopping into the back seat with this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you can see I still have a few inches of legroom left overall. The seat bottom cushion is definitely a little closer to the ground than I would like, but that's likely going to make this more comfortable for kids. And the rear seats offer a little bit of a recline function. So this is the most upright position right there. You can also move it back about an inch overall to make things a little bit more comfortable. Moving over to the Mazda, according to the numbers, I should have about an 1.5 inches more legroom back here than in the RAV4. But in reality, I actually seem to have just a hair less overall legroom. I think that has to do with the overall seating position that I end up finding myself in the RAV4 versus the CX-5. The CX-5, because of the overall dashboard design, I seem to find myself in a little bit more of a reclined position. So keep that in mind if you're comparing these two options. As I usually say, if you're interested in child seat accommodations, make sure you take your entire family with you, your child seats with you, etc. Stuff everybody and the child seats in the vehicle and see if everybody fits. Like the RAV4, the CX-5 offers a 2-position recline mechanism to the rear seat, one that's a little bit more upright, right like that, and then one that is about an inch reclined from there. Moving over to the middle seat, we notice a slightly more pronounced hump in the CX-5, and the center console for the front passengers actually comes a little bit further rearward than we find in the RAV4, making it a little bit less convenient for a center passenger right back there. But as you can see here, both vehicles offer generous overall headroom. That's one of the big reasons that you might want to upgrade from a mid-size sedan into a compact crossover like this. There was a time where the mid-size sedan segment in America was solidly the family sedan segment, but those days have really changed, and we have considerably more headroom back here in this crossover, and that makes it an awful lot more comfortable for a wide range of body shapes. However, we will find a little bit more room for child seats in the back of the average family sedan. Let's start out our cargo comparison with the tailgate race. I'm going to give the Toyota a head start here. Click that button, and let's see here. As you can see, we definitely have a faster tailgate in the Mazda CX-5, although the CX-5's tailgate does not open quite as far, so taller folks may have a problem bopping their head right there on the leading edge. The RAV4 definitely should be a little bit more accommodating for folks that are taller out there. The big thing you'll notice back here is that the RAV4 has a significantly larger cargo area, 37.6 cubic feet back here versus 30.9 in the CX-5. And the cargo area in the RAV4 is overall a little squarer as well. Although both vehicles have a raked windscreen in the back, you can tell that this is a little bit squarer right here compared to what we see in the CX-5. Both vehicles offer a spare tire, but when it comes to overall bag accommodations, you can definitely tell that the RAV4 is the winner here. I have an awful lot more room when I put 22-inch roller bags back here. You can put one all the way back against there and then line some up across the back as well. Although we have more room in the Toyota than we find in the Mazda, there are a few features here that I really appreciate. For instance, the tonneau cover actually lifts up with the liftgate, so that way you don't have to unroll it and then re-roll it when you're putting things in and out of the back right here. The other thing that we also have back here that we don't find in the Toyota is a 40-20-40 folding rear seat back. This really improves overall cargo practicality because if you have longer items to store in the vehicle and you still have 4 passengers, you can do that pretty easily in the CX-5, and it would be a little bit trickier in the Toyota. When it comes to overall interior design, there are definitely some differences. Again, keep in mind that we are in the adventure trim, so we have some slightly different treatment to the leather seats up front. We have a pattern embossed right there in that perforated section. These seats are both heated and ventilated in this particular model. We then have a lot of soft touch materials going on the doors and the dashboard, a lot of stitched materials as well. Moving over to the dashboard, we find more of those orange inserts. We have a place where you could store large smartphones right there in that trough. You have no problem fitting things like large iPhone X Maxes right in there. That's not a problem. The infotainment system is one of Toyota's latest that actually features Apple CarPlay integration finally. We also have a factory navigation system in there. It is a touchscreen system. Below that we have 2-zone automatic climate control, a wireless device charging tray, and then a pretty typical console shifter. Since we're in the adventure trim, we also have an off-road terrain knob right here. This allows us to choose between rock and dirt, mud and sand, and then normal by pressing right there. There are also some buttons to adjust the way the engine and transmission behave: normal, sport, eco, snow, etc. Behind that we have two pretty decently sized cup holders, again trimmed in orange, and then a center console storage area that's a little bit larger than the average in this segment. The instrument cluster features a partial LCD design. There's an LCD right there in the middle, and it is a little bit more colorful and a little bit more configurable than what we see in the Mazda. The steering wheel is one of Toyota's newer designs. It's an almost 3-spoke model. We have the split bottom spoke right down there. And then on the side spokes, we have the controls for the cruise control system rather than having them on a stock as with previous Toyota vehicles. You'll also find track forward, backward, and a mode button over there on the right, and then volume up down over here on the left. The button module on the left side of the steering wheel controls that multifunction LCD instrument cluster. We can move options side to side, select with the OK button, and then hit the back button right there as well. Moving over to the Mazda, we have a sunroof that's just about the same size as in the Toyota, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and this interior design is a two-tone brown and black theme. There's a large amount of stitched material going on the front doors, and if we zoom in really close, you'll notice that we actually have real wood trim, something that we generally don't find in mainstream vehicles like Toyotas or Mazdas. Although this wood is so darkly tinted that it is a little bit difficult to tell that it's real. I actually wish that Mazda had made the wood a little bit more of a contrasting color so it'd be more obvious what's going on in this cabin. The wood trim continues on over to the dashboard, where we find, I think, a slightly greater attention to detail going on with the stitched materials and just the overall design theme. Although the CX-5 is not as new as the RAV4, I think that the interior design has aged very, very well. In the middle of the dashboard, we find the Mazda infotainment system. This is a touchscreen system, but once you're in motion, you can only use the rotary controller in the center console to actually control it. This is running one of Mazda's more recent software versions, which means it does support Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but this is not the same system that we find in the brand new Mazda 3. If we continue on down the dashboard, we find two large air vents right there in the center, and then the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control, as well as the heated and ventilated seats. The center console in the Mazda is a little bit bulkier, and we don't have quite as much storage area as we find in the Toyota, but we have a pretty typical console shifter down there with drive and then a manual mode over to the left. There's just one drive mode button, sport right back here. Then we find the controller for the infotainment system. This is also where we find the volume knob right there. There's an electric parking brake button and auto brake hold. We then have two pretty decently sized cup holders. Again, these are pushed a little bit further back because of the overall center console design. And then we find a slightly smaller storage cubby right there between the driver and front passenger seats. Mazda puts the SD card for the mapping database and the two USB inputs right here in the center console. This means that you can actually keep your smartphone out of view or your other media device out of view if you want to just leave it in the car and leave that lid closed, something that we can't do in the Toyota RAV4. The Mazda also has a partial LCD instrument cluster, but it's not as configurable as what we see in the Toyota. It has a physical ring right here around the speedometer section to give it a little bit more style, but it's not as colorful as the Toyota system, and it doesn't give us quite as much information either. Moving out from there, the steering wheel is a true 3-spoke design. We don't actually have a split bottom spoke right there. We have sport grips up top, and the rim is overall a little bit thinner than what we find in the RAV4, but I actually think it's a little bit more comfortable. Over here on the left side, we have some combination buttons, volume up, down, and then we click in the middle to get the voice command button, track forward, backward, and then we click in the middle for that info button that changes the mode right there in that multifunction LCD, dedicated phone buttons. And then on the right side, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system. We turn the system on and off with the buttons at the bottom. And if we press and hold the on button, you can change the mode from radar adaptive cruise control to regular cruise control. Set the distance with that button right up there. In a somewhat surprising move, Mazda decided not to give us shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel. I really wish they had done that. Above the instrument cluster, we find something that we don't see in the RAV4 at any price, and that is an available heads-up display. It's a little bit difficult to see heads-up displays on camera, but you can see we have that speed image right there, cruise control status. It's all being displayed by this binnacle that is right above the instrument cluster right there, and it's a true heads-up display. It actually projects the image right there on the windscreen glass.
Based on the advertised horsepower figures, you'd assume that the hybrid version of the RAV4 would be about the same speed 0 to 60 as the non-hybrid version, but you'd be incorrect. In our recent testing, the RAV4 Adventure went 0 to 60 in 8.8 seconds, which is a little bit on the slow side for the compact crossover segment, and the hybrid model was definitely the faster version at 7.5. That's a little bit faster than average for the compact crossover segment. Meanwhile, the Mazda CX-5 sort of straddles the fence here. The base engine goes 0 to 60 in 8.1, which is right around average for a compact crossover, while the turbo posted a 0 to 60 time of a very impressive 6.4 seconds. This is definitely among the fastest of compact crossovers in America, outside the luxury segment. So if you're looking to spend under about $40,000 or so for your next compact crossover, the CX-5 is definitely going to be one of the quicker options. The CX-5 is also going to stop a little bit shorter, which surprised me a bit because it doesn't have the widest tires in this group. Both the turbo and non-turbo models in our testing stopped 60 to 0 in 125 feet. Depending on the version of the RAV4 you get, that could take between 130 and 135 feet, even though the RAV4 did have slightly wider tires on it. Depending on exactly which models you're comparing with one another, you could get a RAV4 that's a little bit faster than the CX-5, you could get a CX-5 that is notably faster than the RAV4. But when it comes to overall handling ability, the two vehicles are very, very well matched. The CX-5 has a better overall handling feel, definitely more steering feel, more feedback from the front tires, but when it comes to absolute grip, this generation of the RAV4 does incredibly well. Now, the top-end versions of the RAV4, and that would be the limited trim or the adventure grade, do get a torque vectoring rear axle, which really adds an interesting twist to this segment. The torque vectoring benefit and the torque vectoring effect in the RAV4 all-wheel drive system does help improve things, but it's not immediately obvious to the average consumer out there. So if you floor it in a corner, you're not going to get a rear-wheel drive feel like you can get in some super handling all-wheel drive Acuras. But thanks to that new rear axle design and the ability for it to act like a limited slip differential, the RAV4 is definitely going to be the clear winner when it comes to off-road ability. We get that limited slip functionality, we also get notably more ground clearance than we find in the CX-5. So if you are planning on taking your compact crossover a little bit further off the beaten path, the RAV4 may be the better option here. We also have several different drive modes available depending on the version of the RAV4 you get, so that way the all-wheel drive system will adapt itself to various different terrains, and that terrain management system is also available on the hybrid model, although the hybrid's not going to be quite as capable, obviously, as the adventure grade. Meanwhile, the CX-5 really excels when it comes to overall refinement. We get a cabin that's 2 decibels quieter, 70 decibels versus 72, and the overall suspension design in the CX-5 is a little bit less upset by broken pavement, especially in the corners. Now, on the downside, I did find that the CX-5 suspension was a little bit firmer than the RAV4, so it may not be quite as comfortable for long road trips, but personally, I think that's a balance that I'd be willing to accept. When it comes to fuel economy, the win clearly goes to the RAV4. Regardless of the version you're looking at, it's going to be more fuel efficient than the Mazda. I have to say that the base version of the Mazda CX-5, the naturally aspirated engine, disappointed me a little bit when it comes to fuel economy, because there are a decent number of competitors in this segment that will get better real-world mileage than that base naturally aspirated CX-5. But by the same token, I have to say that I give the turbocharged engine a little bit of a pass here, and that doesn't bother me at all, because instead of class-leading fuel economy, we get class-leading performance, and I'm willing to give up fuel economy for that extra performance. Of course, if fuel economy was really important to you, then you should be looking at the RAV4 Hybrid, because the RAV4 Hybrid should give most folks out there a real-world average of over 40 miles per gallon. Out on the road, there are definitely pros and cons to each of these options. The RAV4 really excels when it comes to economy, that torque vectoring rear axle, which will give you a little bit of on-road benefit, and definitely an off-road benefit as well. And then there's the standard grip that we find. The RAV4 handles very, very well, even in the base model. If you wanted the CX-5 to grip the road better, you could put grippier tires aftermarket on it, but if you wanted to improve the road feel in the RAV4, there's not too much you can do aftermarket to make that happen. The Mazda also excels when it comes to braking and cabin quietness. It overall feels slightly more refined than the RAV4. Which of these vehicles is right for you really depends on your priorities, but if I were choosing and my own money were on the line, I would probably get the CX-5 Turbo just because of its on-road performance.
And now to the nitty-gritty. I'm actually surprised how close these two vehicles are to one another in terms of overall price tag, and I was actually a little bit surprised that the RAV4 ends up being more expensive. This came in at $38,100 before tax, title, license, and of course destination fee, whereas the Mazda CX-5 over here came in at $36,890, just a little bit less expensive overall. The two vehicles are overall very well matched. However, again, they definitely focus on different things. The CX-5 focuses on on-road performance, overall interior luxuries, and the RAV4 focuses on giving us a larger cargo area in the back, higher overall fuel economy, and more off-road ability in this particular trim, the Adventure trim. Keep in mind that there is also a hybrid available if you really want to focus on fuel economy. Again, that's the one that we ordered here at Alex and Autos for a long-term video segment, and that will get you about 40 miles per gallon in average real-world driving. The RAV4 gives us nearly 30% more cargo room in the back versus the CX-5, and interestingly enough, even though this appears to have less overall combined legroom, it actually seems to be a little bit roomier in the cabin than the Mazda right over there. You'll really notice that in the rear seat area. Some of this, I think, has to do with the overall seating position, but with the front seats adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I actually have about 1.5 inches less overall legroom in the back of the CX-5 versus the back of this RAV4 right here, even though according to the numbers, it would indicate that it should be the reverse. The RAV4 should be a little bit more cramped in the rear. Now, the one big defining feature, of course, between these two vehicles is overall 0 to 60 performance. It's just not as good in the RAV4, regardless of the version that you get, versus this turbocharged CX-5 over here. The CX-5 may not have the most modern transmission under the hood, but having fewer gears actually helps make it feel a little bit more engaging. The downside to that, of course, is that if Mazda did put something along the lines of an Aisin 8-speed transmission under this vehicle's hood, it would likely go 0 to 60 even faster and give us better fuel economy than the 24 miles per gallon that this vehicle is rated for. Be sure to let me know what you think about both of these vehicles down there in the comment section below. And if you were looking to spend between $37,000 and $38,000, which of these two options would you pick? Would you get the more off-road capable RAV4 right over here in blue, or would you get the more luxurious and I think better looking CX-5 over here to my left? In the meantime, be sure and head over to facebook.com/AlexNautos so you can see what we're driving this week, and head over to patreon.com if you want to support this channel. There's also a link there at the top of your screen. I'll see you later.